What is going on, guys? This is Skyhound, also known as Geek Detective Pierce, and today I want to welcome you guys to episode 1 of my Retro Rev, I guess I would say, podcast slash channel. And I'm going to be going over the animated musical Anastasia, which was released back in 1997. And before we get started, I just want to say that yes, this is one of the few times I'm actually doing this by myself. I'm still learning just how to use this StreamYard, as well as the learning the process of doing these reviews, and eventually I'll try doing podcasts and the like. But that being said, let us begin with what actually started this in terms of who is in the film and what it's mainly about. So, looking at this, we can see here that director is Don Bluth, and another one of the directors is Gary Goldman. Now, for those of you who have seen Don Bluth and his work, likely would recognize a few titles. So, I will go ahead and rattle off a few that some of you guys might know. The Land Before Time, the very first Land Before Time. Then we also have An American Tail, Five Goes West, and as well as the previous one. Then we also got this film, which I'm going to be discussing in less than a minute. But the other ones that were also part of it, you also have Meg Ryan, who plays Anastasia as she's older. We also got John Cusack, who plays Dimitri. Kelsey Grammer, who plays Vladimir, the chubby fellow that accompanies Dimitri. Christopher Lloyd as Rasputin. Like, as soon as I heard that voice, I was like, the only time I recognized him back in the day was when I was watching Back to the Future and The Pagemaster. Like, that voice is so distinct. Like, anyone can pick it up at the drop of a hat. However, I will mention another movie that most fans are probably familiar with. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Most of you guys probably know this one better than me since I did watch this one just recently, like months ago. After I watched it for the first time, well, I'll just put it this way, really surprised. And I'll eventually be covering that one in a future episode. On top of that, we also have Hank Azaria, who plays Bartok. And of course, this movie, that movie, this was eventually a spin-off for those of you who used to watch these films back on VHS. By the way, this was way before the DVD existed, and this was back in 1997. Internet barely got started. The same case with email. For those of us who were, living through the 90s, you know exactly where I'm going with this. We also have Bernadette Peters, who plays Sophie, as well as Kirsten Dunst, who played young Anastasia when she was, a kid. The legendary Angela Lansbury, who played the Dowager Empress Marie. Most of you guys would likely cite Beauty and the Beast, since she has voiced Mrs. Potts. That film, as well as this, are the only two films I recognize her in. For those of you guys who were definitely born, way before I was, likely have seen her in other roles. And I looked a few up myself before I even started this. One of them was Murder She Wrote is what I was told she was also in. Now that we got that out of the way, let's get into the singing section of it. As I was looking at this right after I got it, it occurred to me that they got one minor detail incorrect from my observation. We have Liz Calloway, who does the singing part for Anastasia. Lacey Chabert, who does the younger one. This was during the prologue. We also get the legendary Jim Cummings, who does the singing section for Rasputin. Jonathan Dokuchitz, who does the singing section for Dmitri. I'll get to that part in a bit. The part that they did not mention, and this is just from my observation, Angela Lansbury does sing a little bit, both in the prologue and later on when the Grand Duchess Marie she reunites with Anastasia later on, and I'll get to that in a bit. So now that we got that part out of the way, let's get into the second section. Now, I did mention that I only know very briefly a bit about, I wouldn't say documentaries though, but just mostly from what I've read online, and that the real Anastasia suffered a tragic end. So, right here, I'm just going to be reading straight off of Britannica. It said that the real Anastasia was born on June 18th, or in the old style, June 5th, in 1901, in Peterhof near St. Petersburg, Russia. And she died on July 17th of 1918. That is really young, and it shows that she was only a teenager when this happened. And it said that she was killed with other members of her immediate family in a cellar where they were confined by the Bolsheviks during the October Revolution. So, yeah, what happened with the family, it's definitely tragic. Very different from what we get in the animated film. This is more of like an alternate universe type thing. With that being said, let us now get into the part where I'm going to be covering the meat and potatoes of this whole thing. So I know I should have covered it in part one, but we'll get to this one right now. The main gist of this story is basically a young girl named Anastasia suffers from amnesia after the events of what happened in her past. She's trying to figure it out, and the only clue that she has is that her family is supposedly in Paris. What she doesn't expect, however, is that, her being young and all that, she didn't expect to fall in love with somebody along the way. So, with that being said, the story starts off with the opening section of the prologue. We get the narration done beautifully by Angela Lansbury. It gives the general background of, when it started, and she was celebrating her brother being the Tsar, or the ruler of Russia. And her granddaughter, Anastasia, was definitely, her one of her favorite kids. So she knows, or she tells her that, I'm gonna have to leave for some time, but, as a parting gift, she gives her a music box, and young Anastasia finds out, that hey, it plays our lullaby, and we get that small section of the start of the lullaby. On the wind, across the sea, hear this song and remember. Soon you'll be home with me once upon a December. Now, for those of you who are curious, if you think I'm haven't actually watched it, I have seen this numerous times and I mentioned it in the description. But for further proof, to show that I'm not lying here, there's your proof. The physical soundtrack. As I mentioned, I don't remember exactly when I got this, but if I had to guess, I know according to Wikipedia, it said it came out in like mid, late um, 1997 in October. So my best guess, I'd say I probably got this maybe around Christmas time. Anyway, the narration goes on, and we come across Rasputin, and he, of course, crashes the party. The the brother eventually, you know, asks him, what are you doing here? You are no longer invited. And Rasputin goes on, but I am your confidant. And he's like, confidant, you are a traitor. Get out. And Rasputin, of course, is having none of it. And he's tells, you know, the Tsar straight up, I'm going to curse you and your family. Then he makes his little prediction that, your family will die within a fortnight. And um, Murray points out that, Rasputin's hatred for the Romanov and his family was so much that he sold his soul. And eventually, when the curse does come about, we see the fall of the Romanovs, and we see the kitchen boy Dmitri tries to aid the the Dowager Empress as well as Anastasia in trying to get out. So in their panic, she loses the music box, and they're in such a rush. Dmitri stays behind, and he gets confronted by one of the soldiers, gets knocked out. Then Rasputin tries to do a surprise attack and drag Anastasia to her death, but fails when the ice cracks. And as a result, as Anastasia is trying to get on the train with her grandmother, she isn't able to, and she gets knocked out. Then we get to the opening sequence and the start of a rumor in St. Petersburg. And at this point, communism has taken control. The people are suffering, and not to mention the Romanovs were actually overthrown. The lyrics do point out that the goals of some of the people, they know about the Princess Anastasia is still alive, supposedly, but the ruling party is just silencing the people. It's like, this is nonsense. They're already gone. Then Dmitri and oh gosh, it's been a while since I've watched this, but I just watched it recently. Dmitri and Vladimir, sorry. Anyway, we get to the point of um, they hear it as a rumor and a mystery, as everyone else has pointed out, and Dimitri's pointing out we're going to go down history if we actually find Anastasia and reunite her with her grandmother. So eventually, we then cut to Anastasia leaving this orphanage, and the caretaker was, I'll put it this way, just plain rude to her. And eventually, she's trying to figure out, where does she have to go. She was told she's been given a job over in the fishing areas, which is on the left side. And then, she knows, Anastasia knows that she's not entirely forgotten stuff. It's just fragments. Anyway, she stops over at the crossroads and then finds this cute dog who just won't leave her alone. And so we get into the music of Journey to the Past. Now, I won't actually sing it, but I will cite certain sections. Basically, that one of the stanzas reads, somewhere down this road, I know someone's waiting. Years of dreams just can't be wrong. And she's basically relying on her memories, or at least what she seems to recall, in order to figure out, okay, where do I go from here? The stanza after that says, home, love, family. There was once a time I must have had them too. Which means that she knows that someone's waiting for her, and this is literally her quest in trying to not just find her identity, but finding her place in the world. So by the time she does get to St. Petersburg, um, she finds out she needs traveling papers, and there's this old lady who mentions about a guy named Dmitri who would be able to assist her with that. However, as Dmitri and Vladimir keep trying to, you know, find the one that would actually help them with, you know, getting the reward and all that, Anastasia eventually finds her way to the now abandoned palace. And unbeknownst to her, despite the failed attempts of Dmitri and Vladimir of trying to find, the girl who could possibly be Anastasia, they don't realize that she broke in and is looking around. But the moment she picks up something, the memories slowly start coming back, and we go into the actual song Once Upon a December. So, in summary, this is basically her just recalling what bits of her past life that she seems to remember. And one of the vases she sees, it had dancing bears, painted wings, things I almost remember, and a song someone sings once upon a December. And basically, as the memories start coming back, what I like about this sequence is that it does do a little bit of foreshadowing later on, because basically the dress that she wears in the dream sequence is what she eventually wears once she gets reunited. So anyway, after that part ends, Anastasia runs into Dmitri and Vladimir. Dmitri's wondering, who the heck are you? What are you doing here? And as Anastasia's running away, Dmitri stops and he's like, and basically in his mind, he's going, this is not possible. Is it? And then he goes to Vladimir and asks him point blank, do you see what I see? And unfortunately, Vladimir's glass was like this. And so he had to help his friend, bring it back down. And the moment he fixes it, he's like, yes, yes, I do see what you're seeing. And, Anya is actually confused, is like, what are you guys looking at? And Dimitri's kind of like circling her. And she's like, why are you looking at me like that? It's like, are you some sort of a vulture or something? And he's basically laying out, that they're trying to find the Grand Duchess Anastasia. And she's like, are you sure you have the right girl? And he's like, and he points out that, Dimitri tells her that they're trying to go to Paris. And Anya's like, oh, what a coincidence. I myself am also trying to go to Paris. But in order for me to do that, I need travel papers. And I was told to meet with you because you might be able to assist me with that. And they were kind of hesitant first because, you know, they think it's not possible because they've gone through this like multiple times. However, Dimitri, being a bit of a pompous jerk that he is, um, they pretend to like you know, not let Anya go with them. But unbeknownst to them, Bartok was actually in the palace. So as Dimitri and Vladimir are going away, Anastasia's still poking around. She finds a photo or a painting of the the Duchess herself. I mean, the younger girl herself and the Empress herself on the painting. And she's looking at it and going, what if they might be able to help me figure out who I am? So she goes back and Dimitri is saying, we got this in the bag, she'll come around. And eventually Bartok wakes up and he's holding, or well, not holding, he's guarding the reliquary that belonged to Rasputin when he sold his soul. And overhearing the whole thing, he's like, am I hearing things? And then he sees the reliquary starting to activate, and he's like, okay, what is going on here? If this thing's activating, that means Anastasia's alive. And then, of course, he gets dragged down all the way to Limbo, where Rasputin is residing. And basically, Bartok points out to her, there is a likelihood, sir, that, the Romanovs, or at least one of them, is alive. And he points out this thing about the reliquary. And he's like, where did you get that? And he's like, oh, this thing is like, I've been keeping it safe for a whole time. And basically, he's pointing out, though, but last I recall, you fell through the ice. And, Bartok pretty much points out, you kind of failed in your attempt in trying to kill her. And he almost considers it useless. He's about to toss it out, and Rasputin's like, you idiot! And we see the interesting animation of the the joints kind of extending so far, manages to catch it. And then he's telling Bartok, you know, I sold my soul for this. This is what gives me my power. And we eventually go into the song done brilliantly, I might add, by Jim Cummings in the Dark of the Night. And it is basically him wanting revenge on the Romanovs. The fact that Anastasia's alive means that his, you know, quest for vengeance, is not over yet. That once he was the most mystical man in all of Russia, he considers that he was betrayed by the royals. They made a mistake, and his curse made most of them pay, except Anastasia. And simply put, he sends out his minions from the reliquary to try and find her so that, he can finally complete the curse against the Romanovs. So eventually, they do get to the train, but this is where the funny stuff comes in. So when Anastasia actually does get in with them, Dmitri is obviously having, well, not Dmitri, sorry, Vladimir, sorry. Vladimir was having fun, like observing Dmitri and, Anastasia interacting with each other. And Dmitri is kind of like telling Anastasia, the way you're acting, that's not usually how royalty is supposed to act. And she basically asks him, do you really think I'm royalty? And he's like, I do. And she's simply pointing out, and she just throws it right back at him. Then stop bossing me around. And Vladimir is having literally like a lot of fun with this. He's looking through the passport that they got, and he pulls out a small little booklet, and he's literally keeping tally between the interaction between the two. And Anastasia's like wiping the floor with him, like what's going on. And she, and of course, Puka, the cute little dog. And before I go a little further, I was considering, like, okay, they likely had plushies of the little fella, didn't they? So I did a little digging, and turns out they did. Give me 1 second. Right here. Yeah, that's how the little guy used to be. And I'm thinking to myself, as cute as it is, I mean, I was just fine with the movie and the music, but I know, some kids are actually into that type of stuff. But anyway, when Dimitri tries to, make amends with Anastasia, she asks him, aren't you going to miss it? He's like, oh, what, like missing, listening to you? He's like, no. He's like, and Anastasia's like, no, I meant, Russia. He's like, not really. He's like, but that was your home. He's like, it was. And the unfortunately, the two got back into bickering again. And by the time Vladimir goes to check up on them, Anastasia's like, can you get this guy out of my sight, though? He's really being an idiot. And so Anastasia leaves the room that they're in. And Vladimir is having so much fun, like, being Puka, and he's thinking to himself, do I suspect a sudden attraction? And Dmitri is going, attraction? To that little brat? You must be out of your mind. And Of course, later on, Vladimir is proven right, but I'll get to that in a bit. But by the time Vladimir leaves the room, he overhears a couple people stating that um, they keep changing the ink on these passports. It was originally blue, now we have it to red. And Vladimir is going, oh, damn, we are in so much trouble. In a panic, he goes back to Dmitri and he points out, hey, I overheard some people mention that we got the wrong passport. I mean, that the ink has changed. We have the wrong passport. It's not blue, it's red. And so they both try to find Anastasia. They find her asleep. I mean, Dmitri goes back to find her asleep. And on top of that, you have the minions from the reliquary of Rasputin chasing them down. Well, Puka, being the observant, alert dog that he is, starts barking its head off because he knows something's not right. And of course, one of the little minions pulls a little silly face on him, trying to scare him, which works. So Dmitri tries to wake Anastasia up. She wakes up, slaps him, and she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know who was. Oh, you." And Dimitri's trying to point out, it's not safe here. We gotta go. And so the minions not only overheat the front of the train, and then they realize they're going so fast, but they make their way over to the baggage car. And so they think that, they have enough track that it's going to stop. It doesn't, because the minions destroy the bridge, and then they're trying to separate the front of the train to minimize their momentum. They don't get that, and unfortunately, so they're trying to break it off. Vladimir hands Dmitri a hammer. Doesn't work. And by the time he finds out that, the train's still going, and then the bridge is pretty much gone, he's like, there's got to be something we can use. Puka, being the smart dog it is, barks its head off and is telling them, hey guys, what about this? And then Anastasia hands Dmitri a dynamite stick. He's like, that'll work. So he places it in the melted section of the coupling. It breaks off, and eventually they were trying to find a means of slowing down because the momentum that the front of the train had was going really quick, and they were really getting close to getting around the corner, which leads to the bridge. So Dmitri finds an anchor and almost falls out. And luckily, Anastasia's around to catch him. So they toss it. It slows him down just a little, and they manage to get off on the snow. Rasputin, of course, is watching from limbo, and he is losing his mind. He's like, damn it, I thought that this was going to be so easy. And, Bartok is pointing out, sir, you're stressing yourself out here. You got to watch your blood pressure and all of that. Stress is a real killer. And the next attempt is, of course, later on a boat. But after that attempt fails, Dmitri and Vladimir are pointing out, that in order to get to Paris, they're going to have to take a bus in order to eventually get there. And Anastasia's thinking, Are we gonna walk there? Not really. And that, unfortunately, during their way to Paris, she finds out that there's a little bit of a test going around. That there's a girl by the name of Sophie who Vladimir is infatuated with, and she finds out that you know that I have to literally prove myself, and she is livid. Anastasia's pretty much livid when she finds out that, oh great, I have to. No one never told me that I had to literally prove myself that I was a Grand Duchess. I mean, presenting myself is one thing, but lying, I wasn't told anything about that. And she pretty much tells Dmitri off. And Vladimir, of course, being the supportive character that he is, um, he tells Anastasia that, you know, you're bright, you're also very confident, and we get into the section of, learn to do it. And eventually she kind of like warms up to the idea of, you know, trying to learn as much as she can about herself. And one of the amusing parts of the song, as they're laying out, what she remembers, or at least what they remember in their past life, Vladimir points out that she was born in a palace by the sea, and she learned horseback riding when she was 3, roughly. And another memory that they remember is that um, she used to terrorize the cook when she was small, and she asked, them, "Was I wild?" And Dmitri simply points out he wrote the book on being wild because she did terrorize the cook. And as they keep trying to help her remember stuff, there's a funny part that in the song they're going over the names of the royalty, and Anya is struggling trying to remember all the stuff because they're going so fast to cover in such a short amount of time. And there's one that is mentioned in the song that one of them wore a feathered hat, and that one particular family member, Anastasia, points out that she recalls one of them owning a yellow cat. And then Vladimir is looking at Dmitri surprised. He's like, I don't believe we told her that. So they eventually get on the ship that is going to lead them to Germany, and then from there they go towards Paris. But Dmitri tries to make amends again with Anastasia, and prior to them getting on the boat, he bought her a blue dress to wear. And once she wears it, Vladimir is really, impressed and all. And Dmitri at this point slowly is getting, you know, like he's slowly getting attracted to her. And so prior to going to Paris, Vladimir has those two dance, and Anastasia tries to lead the waltz, but he's like, no, 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 no. You're not the one doing it. It's Dmitri that needs to do it. And as Vladimir is observing the two, we get a little segment um, where um, he's seen a lot. He had the whole thing planned out, and the only thing he didn't expect was for those two to supposedly fall in love. And at the end of the song, he says, I never should have let them dance. But there were things that were out of his control as well as out of Dimitri's and Anastasia's control because later on, as they were about to fall asleep, Rasputin then has another attempt at trying to get rid of Anastasia. So Bartok also points out that, oh, look, Master, they're just about to, sleep. And Rasputin's like, this is a perfect opportunity. I'll invade her mind where she can't escape and she won't even know that I'm alive. So his minions eventually do invade her mind and she starts sleepwalking. However, Puka notices that she's no longer in her bed and has to wake up Dmitri. And as she's getting closer and closer to, where she's being misled, Dmitri eventually wakes up, finds Anastasia's gone, and he's like, "Oh no, I need to find her now." And as the ship is being tossed and turned in a storm, literally, eventually he finds Anastasia like leaning towards the edge of the boat, about to jump in the water. And at this point, her mind is practically being, you know, misled. She thinks she's actually being led across the field towards, her father and family, and they're in the water, and the illusion is telling her to jump. And by the time Dimitri gets to her, she's freaking out. Then she learns about the so called Romanov curse. But Dimitri actually manages to save her, wakes her up, and she's like freaking out, upset. She keeps going on about this Romanov curse, and Dimitri's confused, like, whatever this is, though, is like, it's not real. And of course, Rasputin loses it again. At this point, there's only one option left, which is since they know they're going to Paris, there's that's the only place that's his last attempt at trying to, getting rid of her. And Bartok is asking, how do you expect us to get there? And Rasputin, like, pretty much points out to him in a joking manner, I thought we'd take the train. So eventually they get out of limbo. And by the time we get to Paris, we see that Sophie is, quizzing these wannabes, who pretend to be Anastasia, reports back to the Empress, and she's like, I'm done hearing about all this, these fakes pretending to be my precious Anastasia. My heart can't take it anymore. And eventually, Dmitri, Vladimir, and Anastasia do arrive. And Sophie is really glad to see Vladimir. And, they go over introductions. And when it's Anastasia's turn to actually, answer the questions, she does answer all of them. But there's some additional details that are mentioned. And Sophie does bring it up, which is, how did you escape? And she goes on to explain about there was a young boy at the palace. He opened a wall. He opened a section in the wall that allowed us to escape. And Dmitri, overhearing this, he's like, oh, damn. I thought I'd never hear this. And the memory, he knows the whole thing. And Vladimir is overjoyed when, Anastasia actually, obviously got Sophie supposedly convinced. He almost got convinced. But then Dmitri drops the truth bomb on Vladimir, saying that part about, the young boy and, opening the wall, the hole in the wall, that was me. I was there when the whole thing happened. I was the boy that helped the Grand Duchess escape with her granddaughter. I know because I was there. And unfortunately, I mean, Vladimir is so elated that, the whole thing was going according to plan. Excuse me. And then, of course, they get the chance of shopping in Paris. And it is at this point that Dmitri finds out that he practically found her. And at this point, he's starting to realize that, okay, I can no longer pretend this is actually reality. And I've come to terms with it because he feels that, you know, kitchen boys shouldn't be with a princess and all of that. Well, right when it comes to um, the realization of what's going on before the actual ballet and all that, basically, um, Dimitri Dimitri just basically just breaks the news to Vladimir that we did what we set out to do, and this is actually the one that we were speaking of. Sorry about that. Another interruption here. But anyway, he, where was I? Oh, yes. Dmitri does break the news to Vladimir that we did what we set out to do. And Vladimir at this point is like, he's not playing the fool anymore. He knows that these two have a thing for each other. And he's basically point blank telling Dmitri, you need to stop lying to yourself and tell her. And unfortunately, after the whole ballet thing is done with, um, that's when the truth eventually gets out. And when the Empress finds out that Dmitri was a con man, he's been, doing this for quite some time. Anastasia hears the whole thing and she is livid upon hearing the news. And she's like, you were using me? You were lying to me this entire time? He's like, no, I wasn't trying to lie to you. But she was like, I can't believe I trusted you, and pretty much just, you know, abandons him at that point. However, Dmitri, being a bit stubborn himself, by the time the Empress is about to leave, he sneaks into the car and she thinks, the driver is going to be taking her where she needs to go. However, Dmitri points out that, you could have at least looked at her before judging. And she is like, I've heard this so many times, like, why should I believe you? So Dmitri is then forced to do one final thing. He knows about the music box. He takes it out and he asked, the Empress, do you recognize this music box? And she's like, you will stop at nothing won't you? And she pretty much asks him, where did you get this? And he pretty much points out to her, it's like, is could there just be a chance that this girl is probably just as lost as you? And by the time we see Anastasia um packing up, she hears the knock on the door, assumes it's Dimitri, tells the person to go away. Door opens, it is actually the Empress herself. Anastasia's surprised, and she's like, I am sorry for, I thought you were. And the Empress goes, I know very well who you thought I was. And they basically kind of um, she basically tells her, I've been through a lot, and, I'd hate being lied to, but, someone told me that, you know, you might look familiar to me. And Anastasia's like, I wouldn't want to try to lie to you, ma'am. And it is then we get into some additional memories that Anastasia slowly begins to find out. And she mentions about peppermint. And the Empress goes, yes, it's an oil that I use. And slowly the memories start to come back that when she was small, she tipped over a bottle, it fell on the rug, and then the room smelled of peppermint. So when the two are finally facing each other, the Empress finds the little necklace, and then she finds Anastasia learns about the music box, and she thinks that this Empress is actually her grandmother. So Anastasia hands her the little key, and then once it starts playing that familiar lullaby, well, the two eventually reconcile. And then Dmitri is watching, of course, from outside the house. He's like, okay, I've done my mission. She's finally reunited. I'm done here. And by the time he's about to prepare, eventually, Rasputin, of course, is deciding to let Anastasia, have her moment, and eventually wants to kill her, of course. But Bartok, of course, is being a bit different from how he was originally. He's like, can you just let this go? He's like, no, I have to see this through. So we eventually get into the section of, yes, Anastasia is actually being prepared for the actual ball, and Dmitri eventually gets summoned by the Empress herself, and she's like saying to him, as promised, here's the reward as well as my gratitude. But Dmitri points out to her, as generous as that is, Your Highness, I don't actually need it. And she's like, you come in here, tell me about, this granddaughter that I supposedly lost. Help me get reunited back with her. And you don't want anything. Why? And she eventually finds out that, you were the boy that saved us back then. And she's simply asking him, why change your mind? And Dmitri just gently, honestly tells the Empress, actually, Your Highness, it was more like a change of heart. So after Dmitri and Anastasia part ways, Anastasia pretty much goes to her grandmother and says, like, where where I'm glad that we're actually reunited and all that. And she thinks that where's Dimitri? And he's like, well, he actually didn't take the money because she assumes that he did. And she's like, you know, aren't you glad that we found each other? She asked her grandmother, and she's like, yes, I am. But you were born into this life of jewels and titles. And she's asking her point blank, is this what you really wanted? And Anastasia's like, of course it is. And her grandmother points out, we will always have each other, but what I really want to know is this what you really want for yourself? Are you sure about yourself? I mean, yes, you went through all of this trouble to find me, and you will always have me. And she's simply pointing out, are you being honest with yourself? Well, Puka eventually runs off, starts barking its head off, and Anastasia follows. Then we get into the confrontation between her and Rasputin. So the reliquary goes to work, and you know, um, Rasputin pretty much is telling her that you may not remember me, but I remember you. And eventually, right when Rasputin's about to do the coup de grace on Anastasia, Dmitri comes back and tries to confront him, but he lets out some of the powers of the reliquary to awaken a Pegasus statue. And unfortunately, despite Dimitri's attempts at helping Anastasia, he gets knocked out, and Rasputin thinks he's almost won. But he doesn't realize that Anastasia is actually alive, and during the confrontation, she eventually comes across the reliquary. Bartok isn't there to help him. He basically points out to his former master, "You're doing this on your own, sir. This can only end in tears." And eventually, um, she succeeds in destroying the reliquary, thereby ending Rasputin at this point. And eventually, the two do reconcile. And on top of that, she returns the crown that was given to her by her grandmother, as well as a letter. And Sophie finds out that they elope. And the grandmother is totally fine with it. It is at this point now we get to the final section of the film. So I tried covering this the best I can, but now let's get to the overall thoughts. As a kid, I did enjoy this movie a lot. While the animation was actually pretty good for its time, the attempt at trying to do, I don't know if I would say CGI or 3D animation, it was more CGI. In this case, there was very little of that. It was more on the traditional end of animation still. The only part that was mostly, I guess I would say, computer animated was the background, the city itself, some of the vehicles, including the train, and the Pegasus statue towards the end of the film. Now, I do want to mention that when it came to the musical section of it, I did mention about the legendary actor Jim Cummings. This man has done a lot of characters that most of us recognize. I can easily rattle off a few off the top of my head. He did Scar. He did um, Ka, the snake from the Jungle Book, as well as Winnie the Pooh, Tigger. He did Pete from Goof Troop, as well as not just Rasputin for Anastasia, but he also did yes, Darkwing Duck. For those of us that are 90s kids, there was just that distinct tone with how he delivered certain bits. And I mean, the guy is just talented for sure. And just to prove my point, yeah, he's done quite a bit. You can see there's Winnie the Pooh. There's some characters, side characters from Aladdin that he voiced. He was also in the Jungle Book. He did Tigger. There's Cough from, again, like I said, Jungle Book. There's Pete. This guy has done so many characters. I can see over there he also did, Taz from the cartoon back in the early days. He was also Steel from Balto, another film that I will eventually cover. It's kind of hard to see, but that Hawk is actually from the Disney film Mulan. There's actually a few Disney films that I do plan on trying to cover at some point, but this is just me starting out in terms of what I am planning on trying to cover here. And you can see here there's also another character from Darkwing Duck. He plays both the hero as well as one of the villains in that cartoon, which it's been a while since I've watched. But anyway, now we get to the overall thoughts. The music was good, soundtrack is great, animation, like while it is dated, it was definitely good for its time. Pacing, I would say, was definitely pretty good, but like the transitions in between, I don't know if I would say it was messy, but they tried to do what they can to fit in a story within a roughly 90-minute time frame. Objectively, I would give this one at least, a 9 out of 10, because the people involved in trying to do this musical, there's a lot of moving parts with just trying to get the animation right, as well as the people when they were, doing their parts. And it's a lot of work also for the voice actors when they're doing multiple takes, as well as the parts for singing. Now, as for this subjective section of it, I'm probably doing this incorrectly. I mean, there's some that were probably pointed out. I'd have to give this one at least. On the music side, it's obviously a 10 out of 10. Animation, I would give it at least 8, maybe 9 out of 10. Story, while pretty straightforward, I mean, it is a kid's film, so that one's probably at least 8 out of 10. And with that being said, we've now come towards the end of this review and analysis for Anastasia. I will point out that there are a few later projects that I'm going to be working on, at least in December. But in the meantime, there's actually 2 films that I'm going to be reviewing. Well, let me rephrase that. One of them I actually did review, but I haven't actually gone into detail. I'm hoping maybe some people are going to be interested in joining me for this discussion, because this is going to cover what I call the toku bakatsu section of this video, I guess I could say podcast, if you will. For those who are Godzilla fans, likely know about Godzilla Minus One coming out. So I can tell you right now that yes, this is one of the films that I will be reviewing. Give me a moment. Let me try something here. Oh, hang on. I figured it out. One moment. Here we go. There we go. So yes, this is going to be one I'll be reviewing. The second film, which I have reviewed. Okay, let me rephrase that. I didn't say I reviewed, but the one that I am going to be reviewing also as part of this Tokubatsu section is this. Shin Kamen Rider. For those who have watched it, I'm pretty sure like what I'll be covering on it is pretty straightforward. And to kind of make the point hit home, yeah, I'm going to be roughly citing the manga as well as the film itself. And while I am going to have to binge watch the original, which is roughly 50 episodes, what I do know is that it stays as true as it could to the manga in terms of who the character goes against, as well as the introduction of Kamen Rider number 2, or Nigo, as it's called. And before people think that I, said a bad word here, I said Nigo, which is Japanese for number 2. Ichigo is obviously number 1. Quick little Japanese language lesson introduction there. But yeah, that's what I'm going to be covering for next time. With that being said, this has been Skyhound, also known as Geek Detective Pierce. Hope you guys enjoyed this. And stay safe, stay frosty, stay sane, but most of all, stay humble. Peace.